My husband changed the locks while I was away. Hi everyone. Before we get into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel's reach has been dropping a bit, and one of the best ways you can support us is by subscribing. It's quick, free, and helps us keep bringing you new and interesting stories. Your support means the world to us, and together we can grow this channel. Thank you so much. Now let's get to today's story. I'm writing from a temporary account for obvious reasons, and I've changed some details to protect my anonymity. The key wouldn't turn. I stood on my own front porch at 11:30 at night. Exhaustion weighing down my shoulders after a 5-hour flight from Chicago, and my house key, the same key I'd used for 3 years, wouldn't budge in the lock. I tried again, thinking maybe I was just tired. Maybe I was holding it wrong. But the metal scraped against metal with a sound that made my teeth ache, and nothing happened. My suitcase sat beside me like a faithful dog, and I could feel Mrs. Peterson watching from her window across the street. The porch light illuminated my confusion, making it a spectacle for anyone who cared to look. I'd been gone for 10 days. 10 days visiting my sister in Chicago while she recovered from her mastectomy. 10 days of hospitals and home nursing and being the strong one while she fell apart with fear. 10 days of promising myself that when I got home, I'd sink into our couch with a glass of wine while Marcus rubbed my feet, and I told him everything. How scared I'd been. How exhausted. How grateful I was to have him waiting for me. Instead, I was locked out of my own house like a stranger. I tried the key again, jiggling it, forcing it, even checking to make sure I hadn't somehow grabbed the wrong keychain from my purse. But there it was. Our house key. The one with the little chip where I dropped it on the driveway last summer. The one Marcus had joked about replacing but never did. The front windows were dark, but I could see a faint glow from the back of the house. Marcus was home. He had to be home. His car was in the driveway right next to where the Uber had dropped me off. I knocked on the door, softly at first, then louder when no one answered. "Marcus," I called out, trying to keep my voice down for the neighbor's sake. "Marcus, it's me. My key isn't working." Nothing. I pulled out my phone and dialed his number, pressing my ear to the door to see if I could hear it ringing inside. It went straight to voicemail. His warm, familiar voice asking me to leave a message. The same greeting I'd heard 100 times before, but now it sounded foreign, almost mocking. "Hey, it's me," I said after the beep, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm home, but there's something wrong with the lock. Can you come let me in?" I hung up and waited, bouncing slightly on my toes from the cold November air. My breath made little clouds that dissipated quickly, like my hope that this was just some weird misunderstanding. After 10 minutes, I tried calling again. And again. Each time. Straight to voicemail. I walked around to the back of the house, dragging my suitcase behind me, the wheels catching on every crack in the sidewalk. The kitchen light was on, and I could see movement inside. A shadow passing by the window. Definitely human-shaped. Definitely Marcus-shaped. "Marcus!" I called out, knocking on the back door. "I can see you in there. What's going on?" The shadow stopped moving. I pressed my face to the glass, cupping my hands around my eyes to see better. He was standing at the kitchen counter with his back to me, completely still, like a statue. Like he was waiting for me to give up and go away. The realization hit me like cold water. He was ignoring me on purpose. "Marcus!" I shouted, no longer caring about the neighbors. "Open this door right now." He turned around then, and through the glass I could see his face. Calm, almost expressionless, like he was looking at a stranger. We made eye contact for maybe 3 seconds, and then he walked out of the kitchen and disappeared deeper into the house. My hands were shaking as I tried my key in the back door, but of course it didn't work there either. Same scraping sound, same resistance, same humiliation. I called his phone again, my anger making my voice sharp and desperate. "Marcus, I don't know what game you're playing, but I'm your wife and this is my house and you need to let me in right now." I hung up and immediately called back. "If you don't answer this door in the next 5 minutes, I'm calling the police." Still nothing. I sat down on the back steps with my suitcase beside me and tried to think. This wasn't like Marcus. In 5 years of marriage, we'd had our fights, sure, but he'd never been cruel, never been manipulative. He was the steady one, the reasonable one, the one who wanted to talk everything through until we found a solution that worked for both of us. But he was also the one who'd been acting strange for the past month before I left for Chicago. Coming home late from work without explanation. Taking phone calls in the other room. Being distant during dinner, like his mind was somewhere else entirely. I'd been so worried about my sister, so consumed with planning the trip and figuring out how to help her through surgery, that I'd pushed those concerns aside. I told myself we'd talk about it when I got back. We'd have time then to figure out whatever was bothering him. Now I wondered if I'd missed something bigger. Something that had been building while I was distracted. Something that had culminated in him changing the locks while I was gone. Because that's what he'd done, wasn't it? He'd changed the locks. This wasn't a broken key or a sticky door. Someone had deliberately replaced the hardware so that I couldn't get in. The thought made my stomach clench with something deeper than anger. It was violation. Pure and simple. Not just of our marriage or our trust, but of my most basic sense of security. This was my home. My name was on the mortgage, on the deed, on the insurance papers. My clothes were in the closet, my books on the shelves, my coffee mug in the dishwasher. And my husband had locked me out like I was a trespasser. I tried calling our friends David and Sarah, who lived 20 minutes away and had spare keys to water our plants when we traveled. But it was almost midnight on a Tuesday, and their phone went to voicemail too. I left a message asking them to call me back, but I didn't explain why. How could I? How could I tell them that my husband had barricaded me out of my own house without sounding completely insane? Mrs. Peterson's porch light came on across the street, and I saw her curtains twitch. Great. Tomorrow the whole neighborhood would be talking about how Marcus Tyler's wife had spent the night screaming at her own front door. I pulled my coat tighter and tried to think practically. I needed somewhere to sleep, and I needed answers. The first was easier than the second. There was a Holiday Inn about 5 miles away, and I could catch a cab. But the answers? Those were locked inside with my husband, who was apparently determined not to give them to me. I left one more voicemail, this one quieter, more desperate. Marcus, please. I don't understand what's happening. I just want to talk to you. I love you. Whatever's wrong, we can fix it. Just, please let me come home. But even as I said the words, I wasn't sure I believed them anymore. The cab ride to the hotel was surreal. The driver kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, a middle-aged woman with a suitcase at midnight, clearly upset, probably looking like she was fleeing something terrible, which I supposed I was. Everything okay, ma'am? He asked as we pulled into the hotel parking lot. Just fine, I lied, tipping him with the last cash in my wallet. The desk clerk at the Holiday Inn was kind but curious, and I could see her trying to figure out why someone would need a room so late with no reservation. I made up a story about a missed connection and a canceled flight, and she nodded sympathetically while running my credit card. Room 237 was generic and clean and nothing like home. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at my phone, willing it to ring, willing Marcus to call and explain that this was all some terrible misunderstanding. Instead, I got a text message at 12:47 a.m. We need to talk. I'll call you tomorrow after work. That was it. No explanation, no apology, no acknowledgement that he'd left his wife stranded on their doorstep with nowhere to go. I typed and deleted a dozen responses. I wanted to scream at him through the phone, to demand answers, to threaten lawyers and police and public humiliation. But I also wanted to beg him to tell me what I'd done wrong, to promise I'd fix it, to make this nightmare stop. Finally, I sent back. I'm at the Holiday Inn on Riverside Drive. Room 237. Come get me. He never responded. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the too-soft hotel bed and stared at the ceiling, replaying every conversation we'd had before I left for Chicago, looking for clues I'd missed. He'd been quiet when I told him about the trip, but I'd assumed he was just worried about me traveling alone, dealing with hospitals and medical decisions. He'd kissed me goodbye at the airport, told me to give my sister his love, promised to take care of everything at home. Had he been planning this then? Had he already decided to change the locks, to shut me out, to end whatever we'd been to each other? The more I thought about it, the more details emerged. How he'd been working late more often, claiming new projects at the engineering firm where he'd been employed for 8 years. How he'd been protective of his phone, taking it with him to the bathroom, keeping it face down during dinner. How he'd seemed almost relieved when I told him I was going to Chicago, like my absence would solve some problem I didn't know existed. And then there was the fight we'd had 3 weeks before I left. Not really a fight, more like a tense conversation that neither of us wanted to finish. I'd found a receipt in his jacket pocket while I was doing laundry, from a restaurant I'd never heard of, on a night when he'd told me he was working late. When I asked about it casually the next morning, he'd gotten defensive. It was just a work dinner, he'd said, not meeting my eyes. Client stuff. Nothing important. But the receipt was for 2 people, and the restaurant was expensive, romantic even. The kind of place you took someone when you wanted to impress them. I'd let it drop because I trusted him, because in 5 years together, he'd never given me a reason not to trust him, because I was busy and distracted, and it was easier to believe his explanation than to dig deeper and find out if there was more to the story. Now, lying in a hotel room because my own husband wouldn't let me into my own house, I wondered if that had been the beginning of whatever was happening now. At 6 a.m., I gave up on sleep and called in sick to work. I couldn't face sitting in meetings and pretending everything was normal when my entire life had apparently imploded overnight. Instead, I ordered room service coffee and started making a list of everything I needed to do. Call a lawyer, figure out my legal rights regarding the house, contact the bank about the mortgage, find out if changing the locks on a jointly owned property without notifying your spouse was even legal. But first, I needed to know what I was dealing with, and for that, I needed to talk to Marcus. He'd said he'd call after work, which meant I had 10 hours to wait. 10 hours to sit in this sterile room and imagine all the possible reasons why my husband had decided to exile me from my own life. I tried calling our mutual friends again, but I didn't know what to tell them. David answered this time, sounding concerned when I explained that I was back from Chicago but staying at a hotel. "Is everything okay with you and Marcus?" he asked carefully. "I don't know," I admitted. "Has he said anything to you? About us, I mean?" There was a pause. Not exactly, but he seemed, I don't know, distracted when we saw him at the hardware store last weekend. Sarah mentioned that he looked stressed. He was at the hardware store? Yeah, buying locks. New deadbolts, I think. We assumed you guys were upgrading your security or something. The pieces clicked into place with an almost audible snap. Last weekend. While I was in Chicago, holding my sister's hand through chemotherapy consultations, my husband was buying new locks to keep me out of my own home. This wasn't a spontaneous decision made in anger. This was premeditated. "Listen," David said. "If you need anything, a place to stay, someone to talk to, just let us know, okay? Whatever's going on, you guys will work it out. You always do." But I wasn't sure that was true anymore. I spent the day in limbo, pacing around the hotel room, ordering food I couldn't eat, watching terrible daytime television that couldn't distract me from the growing certainty that my marriage was over and I hadn't even seen it coming. Marcus finally called at 6:15 p.m., his voice formal and distant like he was conducting a business meeting. "Rebecca." "Don't you Rebecca me," I said, 5 hours of pent-up fury finally finding an outlet. "What the hell is going on? Why can't I get into my own house?" "We need to discuss some things." "Then discuss them. I'm right here. I've been trying to talk to you for 18 hours. "Not over the phone. Can you meet me at Denny's on 5th Street in an hour?" Denny's. He wanted to have whatever conversation this was going to be at a 24-hour diner, surrounded by strangers and fluorescent lighting and the smell of bacon grease. Not at home, not in private, but in public where I couldn't make a scene. "You're scared of me," I realized. "You think I'm going to do something crazy. I just think it's better if we meet somewhere neutral." "Neutral?" Marcus, we're married. We're supposed to be on the same side. Silence. Aren't we? I whispered. Just meet me at Denny's, please. He hung up before I could respond. I sat in the hotel room for another 10 minutes, staring at my reflection in the mirror across from the bed. I looked terrible, exhausted, confused, like someone who'd been blindsided by life and hadn't figured out how to get back up yet. But I also looked angry. And anger, I decided, was better than confusion. I put on my best jeans and the red sweater that Marcus always said brought out my eyes, applied makeup to cover the worst of the damage from my sleepless night, and called another cab. If he wanted to have this conversation in public, fine. But he was going to tell me the truth. All of it. Even if I had to drag it out of him one word at a time. Denny's was exactly as depressing as I'd expected. Harsh lighting, vinyl booths, and the kind of coffee that tasted like it had been sitting on the burner since morning. Marcus was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with his back to the wall like he was expecting trouble. He looked good. That was the first thing I noticed, and it made me irrationally angry. Whatever stress had been eating at him for the past month hadn't left any visible marks. His hair was still thick and dark, his face still handsome in that steady, dependable way that had attracted me to him in the first place. He stood up when he saw me, a gesture that would have been polite if we were strangers, but felt mocking given the circumstances. "Thank you for coming," he said, like I'd had a choice. I slid into the booth across from him and got straight to the point. "Explain. Now, why did you change the locks?" He looked down at his hands, wrapped around a coffee cup that was already half empty. I needed time to think. "So you locked me out of my own house?" I needed space to figure out how to do this. "Do what?" He met my eyes then, and I saw something in them I'd never seen before. Not anger, not sadness, but a kind of cold resolution that made my blood freeze. "End our marriage." The words hit me like a physical blow. Even though I'd been preparing for the worst, hearing it said out loud made everything real in a way that my imagination hadn't managed. "Why?" I whispered. "Because I know about Daniel." Daniel, my sister's neighbor in Chicago, the one who'd been helping her get to doctor's appointments before I arrived. The one who'd been at the hospital every day during her surgery, bringing flowers and magazines and a shoulder to cry on. "What about Daniel?" "I know you've been calling him, texting him. I know about the restaurant receipts in your purse from the last time you went to visit your sister. I know about the hotel room you booked for 2 people. The world tilted sideways. "Marcus, what are you talking about?" "Don't lie to me, Rebecca. I've seen the evidence." I stared at him, my mind racing to make sense of what he was saying. Daniel was 62 years old, recently widowed, and had become like a father figure to my sister during her cancer scare. The restaurant receipts were from dinners where I'd taken him out to thank him for everything he'd done for her. The hotel room. "Oh my God," I breathed. "The hotel reservation. You went through my email." His jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. "I booked that room for my sister," I said, my voice rising despite the public setting. She was scared to stay alone after surgery, and her apartment is on the 3rd floor. I booked a handicap-accessible room at the hotel near the hospital so she'd be comfortable while she recovered. With Daniel. Daniel drove us there because she couldn't drive herself. He helped carry her bags. He's a family friend, Marcus, not... Then why were you so secretive about him? Why didn't you mention him when you talked about the trip? Because there was nothing to mention. He's my sister's neighbor. He was being kind to someone going through cancer treatment. But even as I said it, I could see how it might have looked from the outside. The phone calls to coordinate Lisa's care. The dinners where I'd tried to repay Daniel's kindness. The hotel room booking that, without context, could have looked like an affair. "You went through my phone," I said, the violation settling over me like a cold weight. "You went through my email, my credit cards, probably my computer too." I had to know. "You had to ask. You had to talk to me. You don't spy on your wife and then lock her out of her house when she comes home from taking care of her sick sister." Marcus's face was stone. I saw what I saw, Rebecca. I made my decision. Based on lies. Based on assumptions. Based on... I stopped, suddenly understanding. You wanted an excuse. He blinked. What? You wanted an excuse to leave. You've been looking for a way out, and when you saw those receipts, you decided this was it. You didn't investigate. You didn't ask questions. You just decided you'd found your justification. That's not true. Then explain the woman. It was a shot in the dark, but his face went pale, and I knew I'd hit something. What woman? He asked, but his voice was carefully controlled. The one you had dinner with at Romano's 3 weeks ago. The one you told me was a client meeting, but you paid for wine and dessert, and it was 8 o'clock on a Thursday night. His silence was answer enough. Who is she, Marcus? It's not what you think. Then what is it? He looked away, and when he spoke, his voice was barely audible. Her name is Jennifer. She works in my department. How long? Rebecca. How long have you been seeing her? 2 months, maybe 3. It's not... We haven't... Haven't what? Haven't slept together? Haven't talked about a future? Haven't been planning this whole thing while I was taking care of my dying sister? She's not dying. She could have been. I didn't know that when I left. I spent 10 days terrified that I was going to lose her, and the whole time you were here planning to destroy my life. The other diners were starting to stare, but I didn't care anymore. Let them look. Let them see what a marriage looked like when it died in public. I want half the house, I said, my voice steady despite the tears streaming down my face. I want half of everything, and I want you to move out until we can figure out the legal stuff. Rebecca, listen. No, you listen. You don't get to spy on me, lock me out of my own home, and then sit there acting like I'm the one who betrayed our marriage. You want a divorce? Fine. But you're going to do it the right way, with lawyers and paperwork and division of assets. You don't get to just change the locks and pretend I never existed. I stood up to leave, but he grabbed my wrist. I thought you were cheating on me, he said desperately. I was scared, okay? I was scared you'd found someone else and I was going to lose you. So you decided to lose me first. I pulled my arm free and walked out of Denny's, leaving him sitting there with his cold coffee and his guilty conscience. The divorce took 8 months to finalize. Marcus moved out of the house 3 days after our confrontation. Not because he wanted to, but because my lawyer was better than his and had convinced a judge that changing the locks on a jointly owned property without notifying your spouse was, in fact, grounds for exclusive temporary custody of the residence. I sold the house as soon as the papers were signed. I couldn't live there anymore. Couldn't walk through rooms where I'd been happy without remembering the night I'd stood on the porch like a stranger, locked out of my own life. Marcus married Jennifer 6 months after our divorce was final. I heard about it through mutual friends who felt obligated to keep me updated on his new happiness, as if knowing would somehow provide closure. It didn't. What provided closure was the realization that the man who'd locked me out that night wasn't the person I'd married. The Marcus I'd fallen in love with would never have gone through my phone, would never have assumed the worst without talking to me first, would never have left his wife stranded at a hotel while he planned his exit strategy. Maybe that Marcus had never existed, and I'd just been seeing what I wanted to see. Or maybe he'd changed gradually, so slowly that I hadn't noticed until it was too late. Either way, the marriage I thought I was saving had been over long before I came home from Chicago. I kept the keychain, though. The one with the chipped house key that no longer opened any door that mattered. It sits in a drawer in my new apartment, a reminder that home isn't a place you can be locked out of. It's something you carry with you, something that belongs to you whether anyone else recognizes it or not. Marcus took my house that night, but he couldn't take my home. That was mine all along, and it always will be, even if I had to lose everything else to figure that out.